I would have voted for it because relief is 8 months too late, but $600 is a joke.
Americans are reacting to what's inside the stimulus relief package, including that $600 that will be sent to millions of Americans beginning next month. Plus, we now know who will take over now as Vice President-elect Kamala Harris's Senate seat in California. We'll take a closer look at who he is. And it's no secret that inmates are some of the most vulnerable when it comes to COVID-19, but now it's being pushed to the limit in Philadelphia now that jails are lacking PPE. BNC Prime starts now. Good evening, and thanks for joining me for BNC Prime at 7. I'm Tishani Whitlow. So much ground to cover in terms of news. We'll start in our nation's capital as Congress delivers much-needed relief to Americans struggling during this pandemic. We're joined by our very own BNC White House correspondent, Ariana Manise, who's going to give us a play-by-play. Ariana?
Good evening. From his final remarks of the year, President-elect Joe Biden is declaring that there is a new team in town, one focus on bipartisanship. But the question is, who will be willing to play ball with Team Biden on Capitol Hill? As we've been seeing, Congress has been the talk of the town. Americans have been watching as lawmakers have been going back and forth on different versions of COVID relief and government funding. One key player who has been missing from this process, the outgoing president. Now, the measures, which were signed by Congress late Monday night, are awaiting President Trump's signature. Now, before this, his energy has been focused on finding avenues that could extend his presidency and overturn election results in swing states. In addition to being missing in action on these pressing bills during the past 2 weeks, the national security community has been looking for the president to address an alleged Russian cyber attack that hacked into multiple federal entities. This afternoon, the president-elect stressed the grave risk the attack posed to our nation's security and highlighted that there is no evidence to demonstrate that the attack is under control. Now, Biden, he vowed to not let the cyber attacks go unanswered. Take a listen.
This assault happened on Donald Trump's watch when he wasn't watching. It's still his responsibility as president to defend American interests for the next 4 weeks. But rest assured that even if he does not take it seriously, I will.
Now let's take a look at the future of Congress, because we have learned a great deal over the past 2 weeks. As we've been seeing, the Biden administration has been pulling from the House, which is leaving Speaker Nancy Pelosi with a narrow majority. Now this week, Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, and Rashida Tlaib voted against a measure that is normally split on party lines. We're also seeing more progressives from New York and activists from the Black Lives Matter movement are on the way in the incoming freshman class. So as tight as the House Speaker anticipates votes to be in a 117 Congress, we can also see new progressives influence the Democratic House caucus. Now, as we see lawmakers building their coalitions, we're also seeing the Black community prepare to rally behind the Defense Secretary pick. That's retired General Lloyd Austin. 18 of the nation's leading Black organizations sent a letter to Congress supporting his nomination to Defense Secretary. As we know, this is a confirmation process. In Austin, he'll need a waiver from both chambers of Congress to lead the DOD. BNC, we have been following this nominee from the beginning, and we will continue to closely track this process. Reporting live from Washington, I'm Ariana Manise for BNC. Back to you.
Thank you, Ariana. Governor Gavin Newsom appointed California Secretary of State Alex Padilla to fill Vice President-elect Kamala Harris's Senate seat today. Padilla will become the first Latino to represent California in the Senate. The 47-year-old has served as California's Secretary of State since 2015. Padilla's appointment does not require the confirmation by the California legislature, and his U.S. Senate seat will be up for grabs in the 2022 election.
Can you imagine what mom would be thinking now as I ask you if you want to be the next U.S. Senator of the United States, the great state of California?
You serious?
This is the official, this is the ask, brother.
I'm honored, man, and I'm humbled.
Emotional statement from Padilla. You saw that right there. Now, in a written statement, Padilla said those struggling to make ends meet, to the small businesses fighting to keep their doors open, to the healthcare workers looking for relief, please know that I am going to the Senate to fight for you. Black activists gathered today speaking out about Newsom's failure to appoint a black woman to that U.S. Senate seat. BNC's Anita Bennett has reaction to this announcement.
Here in the Lamert Park section of Los Angeles, there is anger and frustration among activists who have been pushing for Governor Gavin Newsom to appoint a black politician to Kamala Harris's Senate seat.
I'm very outraged, troubled, and disturbed. The fact that Governor Newsom gave our seat, yes, he gave our seat away to a Latino, is something that many black leaders and progressives feel is outrageous. We believe and know for a fact that our seat was stolen. It should have been given to either Congresswoman Karen Bass or Congresswoman Barbara Lee.
So what are your thoughts on Governor Newsom not appointing a black person to the Senate?
It's like everything else. It's all black people are put in the end of the line. You know what I mean?
To me, that automatically means that he fell to the pressure of the Latino community because they came out strong and they put a lot of pressure on him, demanding that they get that seat.
Kamala Harris ran for that seat and won it statewide as a black woman. She ran against Loretta Sanchez, a Latino woman, and trounced her. So that's why I say the seat should reflect the will of the voters who voted in a black woman.
Now, African-American activists say they had been lobbying Newsom by writing letters, making phone calls, and sending emails. But ultimately, they did not prevail. That is the latest here in Los Angeles. I'm Anita Bennett for BNC.
Thank you, Anita. And John Ossoff's Georgia's Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate cast his ballot in early voting today. He's up for one of the two open Senate seats in the state. The hot races have gained national attention and will determine which party controls the Chamber of Congress. Ossoff is hoping to encourage Georgia voters, especially young ones, to let their voices be heard.
We're here to urge everybody to get out to the polls and vote, and especially to urge young people to get out to the polls and vote, to urge young people out. Young people in Georgia have the power to make history.
Democrats need to win both contests to achieve a 50-50 split in the Senate, which would give Vice President-elect Kamala Harris the tie-breaking vote. Even one Democratic loss would allow Republicans to keep their razor-thin majority. They could use to block many of Biden's legislative goals and judicial nominees. There's now more than 77 million confirmed cases of COVID globally. Over 1.7 million people have died from the virus in the United States, over 18 million cases, and more than 322,000 lives have been lost, and unfortunately counting. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has now accepted an advisory committee's recommendation for the vaccine prioritization. It's what's being called Phase 1-B. Adults ages 75 and older and frontline workers like first responders have priority to the vaccines. The committee also approved Phase 1-C, which prioritizes adults ages 65 to 75. People ages 16 to 64 who have high-risk medical conditions and other essential workers. The committee says other essential workers, including those in education, food, the food industry, transportation, public safety, and water waste industries, will be up next. Now, an epidemiologist who is part of the team that discovered a new variant of COVID-19 in South Africa says the mutation is leading cause of recent surge in infections there. Professor Tulio de Oliveira said that the new found 501v2 strain seemed to dominate infections in the country's coastal area. He also says that there is no evidence that the vaccines developed so far would lose effectiveness against that mutation, but rather adapt to the most circulated lineage.
We may end up with a scenario similar as we had for other viruses like influenza, that you have modifications of the vaccines with the most circulated lineage. Yeah, but of course that we still have to study both here in South Africa and as well in the UK. What's the effect of people that have been vaccinated, and a lot of studies are in the process.
And the emergence of this new fast-spreading strain of the coronavirus in South Africa prompted some countries to suspend flights from that country, from South Africa, while they assess how dangerous this new variant is. And inmates all across the country are being impacted by COVID-19. Many haven't seen their loved ones since the pandemic began, and they're not given the equipment they need to stay safe. Our very own BNC's Dre Clark has this story from Philadelphia.
Too many inmates and not enough personal protective equipment, and workers feeling overwhelmed and in some cases victimized. Those are some of the stories coming from workers inside of Philadelphia's prison system. And now city council members are trying to figure out what's happening behind those prison walls. This stretch of State Road in Northeast Philadelphia is home to the city's prison system. And earlier this year, this was the epicenter of Philadelphia's COVID-19 crisis.
So as of April 4th, 2020, the reported high rate of infection in the jail was twice of that of the city's high rate of infection.
At a recent City Council committee hearing on public safety, public health, and human services, Prisons Commissioner Blanche Carney was peppered with questions about deplorable conditions inside the prisons and a lack of PPE for staff and inmates during the pandemic.
And unfortunately, we have had one inmate-related death as the result of the virus, which is one too many, and we had one staff-related death, which is one too many.
African Americans account for 73% of the 4,300 people inside the city's prison system. Since March, more than 1,000 inmates have tested positive for COVID-19. A new federal court order mandates that every inmate has 45 minutes outside their cells to shower, make calls, or meet with legal counsel. But if you test positive, you're immediately placed in solitary confinement. Some council members call that move cruel and unacceptable, with potentially damaging psychological effects to inmates already trying to beat a deadly virus.
Particularly when we know that the prison system is filled with primarily young African American and Latino men. And women. And so this way of operating, we need to do better. We can do better.
To help slow the spread, many inmates were granted early release, and soon inmates will be vaccinated if they choose. All 4 prisons will also conduct universal testing of all prison inmates and employees. Although one worker says the prison staff numbers are dangerously low, and it's all COVID-19 related.
No one took the time to address our anxiety. We have been assaulted just for coming to work. We're doing all that we can.
Better personal protective equipment, stronger enforcement of security and safety measures, and reducing prison overcrowding would help stabilize an otherwise out-of-control dilemma happening inside Philadelphia's prison system. Another issue raised during the hearing, communication between inmates and their loved ones. Because of the ongoing COVID crisis, family members can visit prisons. So inmates have to talk to their loved ones virtually, and in some cases that could cost family members 25 cents a minute. Well, one city council member said that's too much, so he's willing to pledge $10,000 of his own money for the next 2 months to cover the cost. Reporting in Philadelphia, I'm Dre Clark for BNC.
Thank you, Jay. Dre, better yet, the Justice Department is suing Walmart, citing the company unlawfully dispensed controlled substances through its pharmacies, helping to fuel the opioid crisis in America. The civil complaint filed today alleges that Walmart violated federal law by selling thousands of prescriptions for controlled substances that its pharmacists knew were, quote, invalid. This suit comes months after Walmart filed its own suit against the Justice Department, Attorney General William Barr, and the DEA, alleging the government was blaming Walmart for the lack of regulatory and enforcement policies to end the crisis. That suit is ongoing, and we will continue to follow the story and bring you any new updates as it becomes available. Next, President-elect Biden dishing out some harsh criticism for the Trump administration and its handling of the alleged Russian hack. What his administration is planning to do differently once in office. You're watching BNC Prime. And welcome back to BNC Prime. President-elect Joe Biden gave his holiday message from Wilmington, Delaware today. Biden addressed not only the pandemic, but the economic crisis and calls for racial justice. He also talked about cybersecurity breach against the federal government, departments, and its agencies.
This attack constitutes a grave risk to our national security. It was carefully planned and carefully orchestrated. It was carried out by using sophisticated cyber tools. The attackers succeeded in catching the federal government off guard and unprepared. Foreign actors have been working in this breach since late last year, at least last year. The truth is this: the Trump administration failed to prioritize cybersecurity. It did that from eliminating or downgrading cyber coordinators in both the White House and at the State Department, to firing the director of Cyberspace and Infrastructure Security Agency, to President Trump's irrational downplaying of the seriousness of this attack. Enough's enough.
The incoming White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klein, said on Sunday that Biden's response to the hacking campaign would go beyond sanctions. Klein said that Biden was mapping out ways to degrade the capacity of foreign actors to engage in cyber attacks against the U.S. Joining me now to discuss more on this is John Marks, professor of cybersecurity. John, thank you so much for joining us, sir, this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Now, why is this alleged Russian hack so dangerous, and does it pose a national safety risk to our country?
Well, the unfortunate thing is that while this attack is very alarming to those of us in the industry, it's unfortunately not very surprising. For whatever reason, the current president has chosen to deprioritize cybersecurity for reasons that we all, interestingly, consider and speculate on. But the fact of the matter is, we've been kind of watching these sort of things, and I wouldn't say they're inevitable, but they aren't particularly surprising. So hopefully, Biden's message today will serve as a really good wake-up call that we all have to get on board here and really think about solutions.
You mentioned the current administration's lack of response to this was for obvious reasons. What do you mean by that? I mean, the departments of Treasury, Commerce, Defense, State, Energy, those are just a few of the names that were possibly targeted. Why do you think his response was lackluster?
I'm not really sure, right? There's some have, of course, considered that it may be political in nature and that perhaps there might be some collusion going on. I'm not necessarily sure. I have seen in other organizations where one may also just reasonably chalk it up to misunderstanding or simply just not taking the threats very seriously. So, in all honesty, I don't know, but in any sense, I'm much more hopeful that the Biden administration can at least begin to have this difficult conversation.
And based on your professional background, can you explain how hacks like this are usually carried out and what we need to know about this particular one?
Well, this is where things get extremely difficult because, I wish I could point you to some software or some solution to say, download this and everything you'll have will be safe. But unfortunately, we're really not in that world. And in fact, what makes this really difficult is that a lot of the received wisdom that we get, always do your updates, may not apply, may not be good enough. In fact, on the current hack, it was done through a company, I believe, called SolarWinds. And the vector of the attack was actually the recommended update. And so really, I wish I had something simple, but I know I kind of say talk to your local nerds, and local nerds, be patient with everybody else, and we can hopefully get through this.
I mean, John, one would like to think the federal government has layers and layers of protection. I mean, we're not talking about my home computer, being hacked. So is there any additional protection that you think the government needs to enact? Or is this just part of the game that we get used to moving forward? Because this isn't the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not just technical. It's, the biggest, right now, the biggest issues and the biggest vulnerabilities inside cybersecurity, most people would say are more personal, right? You have to take a look at You don't necessarily come up with a clever hack to break an established system or break established encryption, which is extremely difficult. You guess somebody's password, or you get somebody to click on the wrong link. So, there's going to have to be another look. People are going to have to take another look at how they operate day to day, in order to mitigate these risks. But, unfortunately, there really are no silver bullets.
I guess my last question, and if you could answer this, John, in about 20 seconds, I'll probably give you 30. Any advice for Americans and their personal computers, as well as their personal information, considering the departments that were targeted in this hack?
Well, there are resources available where you can see if you personally have been compromised. But again, I'll reiterate this idea that we all have to kind of be open to new ideas and new ways of thinking about things. I have practices and things that I do that people kind of scoff at and now are maybe kind of coming around to, and not that you have to do these things every day. My example is that I don't do social media on my phone at all. I only do it on my computer. Now, that may not work for everybody, but it may be something. Let's have a conversation about whether this is a good idea for you or why I do this, and maybe that can help drive some of our interpersonal decisions as well.
Well, thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure having you. We have John Marks here, professor of cybersecurity. Thank you. Happy holidays. And we look forward to speaking with you again in the future, sir. Have a good evening.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Next, we've heard about it for years, but now a Kansas City newspaper is apologizing for it. We'll hear from the newspaper's president and editor about its so-called racist reporting after this short break.